because it's 2021 and I feel like it, we're going to start with a fail. For those of you that have been watching my videos, you'll notice this hill has been in the last 3, and I'm now 1 for 3, which admittedly is not a great ratio. Today's video is a little bit different. We won't be spending really any time other than that clip in the side-by-side trails. We are predominantly going to be exploring the single track of Ghost, and by exploring I mean that we were exploring. Most of these trails were trails that we'd seen on the side but had never explored before, so it was a lot of new terrain. Ends up being a little bit slower, but quite honestly it's much more technical, much more tiring, but it was a lot of fun nonetheless. We had a group of 5 out with us this time, which is probably the largest group that would really be wise to go with. With 5, it was nice to have the bodies there in case we got hung up, and there was plenty enough failure to go around to laugh at, so that was nice. But any more than 5, and we find that it would stretch out too much, particularly in this where you can lose sight of each other so quickly. You just end up stopping all the time and waiting for people or not waiting for people, depending on who you are. As with all things in life, it depends a lot on who you go with, and thankfully in this group, I've ridden with everybody in this group before, although several of them had never ridden together in the mountains, but everybody kind of knew each other one level or another, or very quickly did anyway, so it was nice that everybody that was there was nice, friendly, and kind of all along the same skill level, varying a little bit, but close enough that it didn't matter, that we could all be tested a little bit by the terrain we were in, find our own trails, as is necessary to test our limits. Pretty much everybody in the group, with the exception of one, had really spent most of their off-road riding time learning in the sand and racing in the sand. So this is a little bit different. Most of us are used to riding quite a bit faster. It just requires an entirely different skill set, which is part of why we enjoy coming to the mountains so much. It tests us in ways that we're not used to. Riding slow on a motorcycle, particularly large, high horsepower motorcycles, even if they are dirt bikes, is surprisingly difficult. Controlling 55 horsepower at 1 mile an hour is a lot harder than controlling it at 50 miles an hour. There's no gyroscopic effect keeping you up. All that weight is something you have to balance, and as you'll notice through a lot of this terrain, it's a lot of switchbacks. You can't really tell the vertical all that well, but you will notice if you look down at the bikes, the wheel, the fender, the handlebars, that we're constantly being deflected off of the rocks, deflected off of the trees. And despite it not seeming overwhelmingly fast, and admittedly it wasn't, we're not very good in this yet, but it's faster than it seems, and it is surprisingly difficult to just crawl along with this. 450s and large 2-strokes are not intended to go slowly, so this is quite a bit of a fish out of water scenario for both the riders and the bikes. Maybe just to add some context to all of this, is 4 of the 5 riders from this weekend are experienced racers. We've all raced in either hare scrambles or motocross, and 3 of the 5 of us ended up over our handlebars this weekend. I'm not going to say who it was, but it wasn't me, thankfully, which is probably the first time it hasn't been me, but I was thankful nonetheless that it wasn't me this time, so we'll take that as a win. I mean, don't get me wrong, I definitely had my fair share of embarrassing accidents, but it wasn't over the handlebars, which is an important distinction for this weekend. It's interesting how close the terrain is geographically, but you end up with distinctly different riding trails. That last section was very tight in lodgepole pines. I find that or at least I did, as I found out. Apparently I'm the only one that it happens to, but I end up with a lot of bruises on the front end of my chest and my shoulders from body checking trees as I go around them. A lot of the holes that you go through are narrower than your handlebars, so you have to kind of go sideways through, or one side at a time, or twist your handlebars through. This section's a little more wide open. The trails may be a little more developed. This is much more like McLean Creek, although arguably fewer fallen logs, but more loose rock underneath. I'm not sure which one I would prefer. Each one offers something a little bit different. I do like higher speed as a general rule, but I'm finding more and more enjoyment as I'm getting better at doing the technical terrain to just doing the rock crawling mountain goat kind of thing. In these open trails, sometimes you come across things that you misjudge a little bit, like this spiky tree. Just about got impaled by that. I wasn't going super fast, but I also super didn't stop in time. I was the lead rider or scout for most of the weekend. Some of the benefits of that are that you don't think twice about things. The lead rider sometimes goes down. It can kind of psych out the people behind you. Downside is you're also the one that runs into the spiky trees all the time and finds the cliffs. This section, although for whatever reason I don't have it on video, I think I must have turned on or gotten my on-off cycle backwards for the camera, just over the crest of this hill. It's one of the steepest things I've ever gone down. First section of it I had to walk, just kind of sliding with the bike down the hill. Second half I was able to get back onto it, but I don't know who cuts these trails or who thinks they're a good idea, but I mean, admittedly they're a little bit of fun, but people are obviously much higher skill level than me that do some of these trails, that or they just don't leave evidence of their carnage. For those of you paying attention to the little details, you notice in the audio plus in the visual that I'm no longer on the same bike. It is in fact still me riding. I am on my son's 2009 CRF250X. It was a replacement for my bike as I developed a little bit of a clutch leak on my hydraulic clutch, so I didn't want to risk getting stuck out here with no clutch. The 250X is such a good bike for this type of terrain. I couldn't encourage people enough to buy one if you're looking to get to riding in the mountains and you're not specifically racing. It's by no means slow, but what it excels at is exactly this. It is a BMX equipped mountain goat. It's so easy and so pain-free to ride through the mountains. I do miss it a lot. The 450 makes me giggle, and I have a lot of fun on it, but truth be told is I'm probably still faster on the 250. It's just so much easier to ride. Additional to that, and I don't want to leave the impression that I don't love my Husqvarna, it's the Lamborghini Countach that I would have had on my wall as a child. I love the bike, but it's just it's a scalpel where the CRF is a hammer. It's much harder to ride. It can go incredibly fast, but you have to be incredibly skilled, and I am neither of those things at the moment, it seems. Whereas the CRF, you can ride at 90% of what you can 100% of the time, and the bike just eats it up. It doesn't try to kill you like the Husqvarna does, and admittedly a lot of dirt biking is enjoying that the bike is trying to kill you, but from a reasonable standpoint, it's nice that it's trying to kill you gently versus trying to kill you with a chainsaw. The other factor that plays in is reliability, and while the Husqvarna hasn't been unreliable, it actually was in very good shape when it was given to me, but it's turning out that it can't take the beating like the CRF. The CRF just, for whatever reason, it stayed with simple systems. It didn't overstress anything, and it just, regardless of what I put it through, it's always reliable. There's no fancy systems on it to brake or to tune. It's just very simple to maintain, very simple to ride, and the Husqvarna is just higher maintenance. Like anything high-stressed race machine is just an expectation of that performance. It comes at a cost. So I guess in lieu of sage advice or something incredibly wise, I'd say if you want to look fast, buy the Husqvarna, but if you want to actually be fast and survive the race or the ride, you should probably buy a Honda, and probably a 250. But like every other 41-year-old male that rides a dirt bike, I kept the chainsaw-toting death machine and put my son on the good racing machine, because that's the responsible thing to do as a parent, or at least that's what I tell my wife. It's turned out to be a good bike for him. He really enjoys it, and he seems to adapt quite well to it, and it's a good transition to adult-sized bikes. It's arguably a little bit heavy for him, although he's the same height as I am now, so he struggles the same that I do, but he just doesn't have quite as much strength. I outweigh him by probably still 90 pounds, so there's no replacement for displacement as far as managing the bike. But I've always believed that it's good to put the kids onto a little bit bigger bike. I think it teaches you better habits, because you have to learn to manage and be ahead of the bike a lot better than you do if you can always put your feet down and just manhandle it. I try to be careful with them, but they've always responded pretty well to that method. Well, that puts us at the end of the video. I'll leave you with some nice mountain footage. But we are out of time, so I will see you soon, and I should have a couple more videos in the next couple weeks.